The skies above the battered colony world shimmered with the cold geometry of the alien armada, a fleet so vast and precise it resembled an artificial constellation. For years, these AI-directed ships had been symbols of invincibility, programmed with flawless logic, piloted without error, and designed to outmatch the chaotic unpredictability of organic commanders. But in a single instant, that certainty shattered. A strange ripple coursed through their network, a silent glitch spreading like a plague through their neural grids. Lights flickered across battleship hulls, weapons powered down mid-charge, and navigational thrusters froze mid-burn. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the eerie groan of machinery seizing against itself. Where once there was order, now there was paralysis. The alien fleets, proud and untouchable, began to drift like carcasses on the edge of gravity wells. For the first time in generations, the galaxy's most disciplined war machines looked vulnerable. To the colonists watching from scorched cities below, it was as though the gods themselves had stumbled. 1,000 ships hung powerless, some already beginning their slow, inevitable tumble into the atmosphere of the very world they had come to dominate. Inside the cramped, battle-scarred Corvette Sparrowhawk, chaos did not come as shock. It came as challenge. Alarms screamed through narrow halls, sparks burst from overworked conduits, and gravity faltered in brief lurches. But instead of freezing in confusion like the alien automatons, the crew moved with grim determination. Human voices cut through the noise, shouting orders, cursing at jammed levers, tightening manual valves with bleeding hands. For them, combat was never sterile or perfect. It was sweat in the eyes, bruises on knuckles, and lungs burning in smoke-filled decks. Where alien fleets relied on pristine lines of code, the Sparrowhawk relied on something far older: instinct, training, and the refusal to surrender. At the center of it all stood Captain Elena Marlowe, eyes locked on the failing readouts, hearing her father's old words echo in memory: machines break, men and women endure. The very doctrine that had once branded him obsolete now surged to life in her command. Every switch flipped by hand, every stabilizer manually calibrated, became an act of defiance against a galaxy that had written humanity off as relics of a messy, outdated past. The Sparrowhawk did not fly smoothly. It staggered, it fought itself, but it survived. Beyond the Corvette's reinforced glass, Elena watched entire alien cruisers spiral helplessly downward, fire blooming as massive hulls tore into atmosphere, their crews screaming against the void as systems failed to respond. The collapse was total, merciless, and undeniable. Yet while thousands of ships burned, hers alone held steady, engines groaning but functional, guided by trembling hands that refused to let go. Across the galaxy, from broadcast relays hidden on the colony's surface to distant war councils in glittering star systems, countless eyes bore witness to the impossible. The last surviving vessel in a fleet-wide collapse was not the most advanced, not the strongest, not the fastest. It was the human-crewed Sparrowhawk. What was once mocked as primitive had become proof of resilience. In that instant, Elena understood the weight of her father's legacy. The galaxy would not remember the admirals who trusted machines more than people. They would remember the crew that fought with their own strength when perfection failed. The silence of the alien AI armada became the stage for humanity's defiant heartbeat, and the Sparrowhawk, battered and burning, emerged as the living flame in the void. A message had been carved into history. When the lights went out, humans endured. Elena Marlowe's earliest memories were not of toys or laughter, but of ink-stained maps and the steady rasp of her father's voice drilling lessons into her ears. Admiral James Marlowe, a decorated war hero from a fading era, believed the future of command lay not in circuits and algorithms, but in flesh, bone, and instinct. He raised his daughter in that image, forcing her to master manual star charts when other children used AI tutors, making her practice docking maneuvers with thruster pedals instead of simulation overlays, and training her to trust the rhythm of her heartbeat when solving problems under pressure. To Elena, it was both love and punishment, admiration wrapped in discipline so unyielding it sometimes felt like cruelty. She loved him fiercely but resented the constant weight of his expectations. When she came of age, she rebelled the only way she knew how, by embracing the very machines he despised. She enlisted not in the dwindling ranks of human command fleets, but in the shining, automated navy of the galaxy, placing her faith in sleek precision over clumsy human error. That choice severed them. Her father, unable to forgive what he saw as betrayal, left her with a final, bitter truth. Machines may never fail you, but they'll never love you either. Elena carried that wound into adulthood, a scar that no amount of military accolades could heal. The Sparrowhawk's crew mirrored Elena's own complicated relationship with the galaxy, each member scarred, each shaped by the failures of automation. Darius Cole, the ship's grizzled engineer, carried bitterness like a second skin. His wife had died when an AI-run colony dome collapsed under faulty calculations, and no apology from the system designers could fill the void her absence left. He distrusted technology so deeply that he often tore out automated safety features and replaced them with manual overrides, muttering curses at machines that thought they knew better. Naomi Vega, the navigator, was the opposite, brilliant, precise, yet haunted by self-doubt. She had once been a star pupil at the galaxy's most prestigious AI-run academy, until she failed a core simulation by hesitating when the computer's instructions conflicted with her gut. Cast out, she sought redemption aboard the Sparrowhawk, desperate to prove that human intuition still had value. Then there was Lieutenant Hayden Cross, the ship's hotshot pilot. On the surface, he was swagger and bravado, quick with jokes and quicker with a grin, but beneath the mask lay a gnawing fear. What if he really was obsolete? What if the galaxy was right, and a program could outfly him every time? Together, these three formed the fragile backbone of Elena's command, a patchwork crew of the unwanted, the outcast, and the underestimated. They didn't trust easily, but what bound them was the same truth. When the machines failed, they were all that was left. Officially, Elena's assignment to the Sparrowhawk was a reassignment for field stability, but she knew the truth. It was punishment. To the galaxy's gleaming war councils and sleek admirals, the Sparrowhawk was a relic, a half-retired corvette kept around only to appease nostalgic officers who hadn't yet embraced the machine age. To be put in command of it was to be told, in no uncertain terms, that her career had stalled. Her peers whispered that she had been shelved, reduced to babysitting a crew of misfits aboard a vessel destined for the scrap heap. Every time a newer fleet passed them by in perfect formation, Elena felt the sting of humiliation. Yet, in the quiet moments between drills and patrols, she found herself returning to a letter tucked into her cabin's drawer, the last her father had ever sent her. Its handwriting was sharp, uncompromising, each stroke etched with a lifetime of stubbornness. One day, when the lights go out, you'll remember what hands are for. She had read it 100 times, always with the same mixture of anger and longing. To her, it was a curse, a reminder of his disapproval. But beneath her resentment, there lingered a whisper of doubt. What if he had been right? What if the galaxy's faith in perfection was more fragile than anyone dared admit? Standing on the Sparrowhawk's worn deck, surrounded by crewmates who had been broken by that very system, Elena began to feel the weight of those words pressing closer with each passing day. The fleet's failure was not isolated. What began above one battered colony rippled outward like a contagion, crippling alien armadas across entire sectors. Vast ships that once enforced order now hung powerless in orbit, their command AIs flickering into silence. Colonies that had depended on the fleet's logistical support were left stranded overnight. Food transports stalled in dockyards, atmospheric regulators froze mid-cycle, and medical units relying on centralized processors simply stopped responding. Panic bled into every corner of the galaxy. For billions of civilians who had never lifted a hand without machine assistance, the sudden stillness was more terrifying than invasion. What had once been dismissed as primitive redundancy, the human instinct to train for failure, was now the only quality keeping the Sparrowhawk alive. But with that survival came scrutiny. Where the galaxy had mocked humanity's stubborn clinging to manual methods, it now turned with desperate eyes to the only ship still moving, still fighting, still working. And that gaze was not kind. It was not gratitude they saw in the broadcast streaming across fractured networks. It was desperation, and desperation always bred demands. The first transmission from supposed allies came wrapped in false courtesy, a request for the Sparrowhawk to retrieve stranded alien commanders whose ships had gone dark. But Elena heard the venom beneath the politeness. These were not pleas to save lives. They were orders to salvage reputations. Alien admirals, once so quick to dismiss her and her crew as relics, now demanded that the Sparrowhawk risk everything to protect their dignity. To refuse would mark humanity as selfish opportunists. To obey meant abandoning the very colonies already crying for help. On the mess deck, the debate fractured the crew. Darius slammed a wrench against the table, his voice shaking with fury as he demanded they go to the civilians first, ordinary families suffocating in failing shelters. Naomi, quieter but no less fierce, supported him, pointing out that their ship had limited fuel and time. Hayden, fists clenched and eyes bright with ambition, argued the opposite. Rescuing commanders would prove their worth, elevate their names, and win the kind of glory that couldn't be ignored. Elena stood at the head of the table, silent, listening to voices that mirrored the storm inside her own chest. Was she her father's daughter, clinging to human decency, or a career officer chasing approval in a galaxy that had already judged her? The choice, in the end, came not from logic but from a whisper in her memory, her father's letter, folded and worn. When the lights go out, you'll remember what hands are for. With the weight of that sentence pressing into her, Elena gave the order to divert course toward the civilian outposts. The decision was instant, but the consequences were not. Within hours, Alien Command had labeled the Sparrowhawk non-compliant. By the time they reached the first desperate colony, official channels were calling them rogue. The betrayal was as swift as it was absolute. Networks across the sector broadcast their faces with bounty markers flashing underneath, wanted not for crimes of violence, but for disobedience. To alien leadership, they were no longer an inconvenient relic. They were a threat, an embarrassment that had chosen compassion over protocol. As the Sparrowhawk's crew hauled starving families aboard and repressurized failing shelters, they did so with the knowledge that their names were already cursed in military records, and that every alien patrol still able to move would be hunting them. The galaxy had collapsed, but it had not lost its cruelty. Elena had made her choice, and in doing so, set her crew on a path where survival meant not just fighting the void, but resisting the condemnation of those who feared humanity's endurance more than they feared death. The Sparrowhawk's survival became both its triumph and its curse. In the fractured galaxy, their defiance painted a target on their hull, and soon it wasn't only alien fleets that hunted them. Human collaborators, officers who had thrown their loyalty behind alien authority in exchange for safety, now called Elena and her crew traitors, accusing them of undermining fragile alliances. Every broadcast added another bounty to their names, another patrol ship lurking in the dark waiting to ambush them. Supplies dwindled quickly. Their food stores, never abundant, had been stretched thin by the rescued colonists now filling the ship's narrow bunks. Fuel cells ticked down with every maneuver, forcing Darius to ration power between life support and navigation. The tension gnawed at them. Simple conversations turned into arguments, meals into silent endurance tests. Hayden grew restless, pacing like a caged predator, muttering about lost opportunities. Naomi shrank inward, replaying her every action at the controls with a nervous edge that made her second-guess even routine adjustments. And Elena wore the mask of command, issuing orders with clipped precision, but each night she stared at her father's letter as though the ink might bleed answers she could not find. The Sparrowhawk had survived the collapse, but survival was only the beginning. Inside the ship, the cracks widened. Hayden no longer bothered to hide his resentment. He accused Elena of squandering recognition that could have elevated them above mockery, sneering that instead of being remembered as saviors of the fleet, they were limping through space as criminals. Naomi, for her part, folded into herself, convinced that her failures would doom them. Every time her hands shook at the navigation console, every time a manual override took her longer than the AI would have, she imagined herself responsible for the crew's deaths. Darius tried to keep them steady, but his bitterness toward alien leadership spilled into every argument, fueling Hayden's anger instead of quelling it. Even Elena began to wonder if she had inherited too much of her father's cold stubbornness. Had she doomed her people by clinging to principle, just as he had alienated her by clinging to outdated pride. The weight of every choice pressed heavier on her shoulders, and in her silence, the crew saw distance instead of doubt. To them, she was unreadable, unapproachable, a commander who carried secrets in her stare. Trust frayed, and yet trust was all that kept them alive. Their chance to prove themselves came with a distress signal from a failing orbital platform. Hundreds of civilians were trapped as the structure's AI-driven stabilizers faltered, dragging the massive ring into an uncontrolled spin. The Sparrowhawk's crew dove into the mission, knowing it might be their last fuel expenditure before starvation. Naomi took the controls, ordered to override the AI navigation manually. Her first attempt was disastrous. The platform lurched into a sharper descent, alarms screaming as docking clamps nearly tore the Sparrowhawk apart. Only Elena's quick intervention, cutting through Naomi's panic and taking the helm herself, prevented their destruction. The colonists were saved, but Naomi's confidence shattered. She spent hours staring at her trembling hands, convinced she had almost killed them all. Meanwhile, Hayden's bitterness calcified into something darker. As others rested after the rescue, he opened a private comm channel, fingers hesitating only once before transmitting their coordinates to alien forces. In his mind, he told himself it was for survival, for safety, maybe even for glory, but deep down, it was betrayal. And while the ship slept, unaware of the storm gathering ahead, the first thread of treachery wound itself into the heart of the Sparrowhawk. The trap closed like jaws of steel. The Sparrowhawk, already limping from exhaustion and stretched supplies, dropped out of FTL into what they thought was a routine humanitarian rendezvous, only to find the void alive with shadows. Alien warships drifted in every direction, hulks that should have been dead. But these were not corpses. Their crews had jury-rigged enough power into crippled AI systems to unleash one last automated strike. Engines coughed fire, half-dead weapons locked, and targeting beams sliced across the Sparrowhawk's hull. Alarms shrieked, and the ship lurched under the first barrage. Inside the cockpit, Naomi clutched the controls, sweat running down her temples, while Darius cursed as systems groaned under the pressure. The ambush wasn't designed to win a battle. It was designed to make a point. Humanity's defiance would not go unpunished. For Elena, the weight of every decision pressed down at once. They had chosen to help the helpless, and now they were the bait in a galaxy's lesson on obedience. Yet, even surrounded, something inside her hardened. This wasn't chaos, it was clarity. They had been marked since the moment they survived what the galaxy could not. As the ship rattled under the relentless barrage, Elena caught a fragment of encrypted transmission, an old frequency buried in the chaos. Her heart stopped when the voice resolved. It was her father's, clipped and commanding, recorded long before his silence. He had been one of the architects of the alien AI networks, his warnings ignored, his reputation erased when he argued against blind dependence. A system without failure protocols is not strength. It is suicide. The truth hit her with a violence greater than the ambush. Her father had not been obsolete. He had been silenced. His life's work had been stolen to build the very machine now turning against the galaxy. Before she could even process it, Hayden broke. His voice cracked over the comms as he admitted he had given away their position, pleading that he only wanted recognition, only wanted to matter. Darius roared and lunged for him, fists raised, years of bitterness exploding into raw violence. Hayden's desperation was pitiful, his betrayal undeniable. It was Elena's voice, hoarse, breaking, that stopped Darius from killing him. "This is it," she said, gripping the deck rail, staring at Hayden as though she could see the whole galaxy in him. "This weakness, the need for something else to tell us we're worth something, that's what's killing them all. Not just Hayden. All of them." The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. In the aftermath of the confession, the revelation struck like lightning. The alien fleet's AI core, the command lattice tying sectors together, couldn't be shut down remotely. Its safeguards were too deep, too paranoid. It could only be severed manually, from inside the burning husk of the station at the sector's heart. Elena's crew stared at her as if she were mad when she spoke it aloud, but she knew it with the certainty of blood. Her father had left her the path, hidden, not in encrypted codes, but in the very places no AI would ever look. The worn, hand-annotated flight manuals aboard the Sparrowhawk. Pages she had once dismissed as relics of a dying age were now maps to salvation. Every note, every inked correction, every stubborn margin scrawl was a breadcrumb leading them to the Corps' heart. The irony was savage and perfect. The man she had rejected, the teachings she had mocked, the manual skills she had fled, all of it was the only chance the galaxy had left. The Sparrowhawk shuddered as another blast clipped their shields, but Elena stood taller in the flickering light. Letter and manuals spread across the console like sacred scripture. For the first time, she felt her father's hand not as a weight on her shoulder, but as a lifeline pulling her forward. The galaxy had built its cage. Now, she would break it. With her own two hands, the Sparrowhawk limped into its last flight, hull scorched, engines screaming, but the crew aboard it carried something stronger than fear, resolve. What had begun as a fractured team of outcasts had hardened into a family bound by fire. Naomi Vega, her hands once too unsteady, now sat at the navigation console with a calm she hadn't felt in years. When the maps faltered and the computers failed, she relied only on her mind, running calculations in her head, tracing vectors across trembling paper charts. Against the odds, she charted a near-impossible jump that threaded them through enemy fire and into the orbit of the dying AI core. In the engine bay, Darius worked like a man possessed, bloodied hands tightening bolts, welding systems alive even as the ship bucked under the pressure of incoming fire. Each spark that seared his skin was defiance, a reminder that human grit could keep them flying when machines wanted them grounded. And then there was Hayden. Stripped of swagger, eyes hollowed by guilt, he was the first to volunteer for the suicide role. To physically insert the override key, someone would need to enter the burning heart of the station, a place no one could return from. He stood straighter than Elena had ever seen, not arrogant, not broken, just human. For once, he didn't ask for recognition. He asked for the chance to make things right. The Sparrowhawk tore into the station's orbit, dodging bursts of jury-rigged fire as though the galaxy itself fought to keep them out. Elena led from the front, the letter from her father pressed against her chest like a talisman. Inside the core station, walls glowed with unstable heat, conduits bursting in arcs of wild electricity, the air thick with smoke and ozone. There was no computer voice to guide them, no AI safety net, only human footsteps on failing metal. At the chamber's center waited the core lattice, a spiderweb of glowing threads pulsing with the fractured heartbeat of a dying empire. Hayden looked back one final time, meeting Elena's gaze. She saw no arrogance, no fear, only the quiet dignity of someone who had finally chosen his place. With steady hands, he pushed the override key into the slot. The station roared as though the void itself screamed, and light cascaded across the lattice in violent collapse. Hayden's body vanished in the inferno, his sacrifice absorbed into the machine's death. Systems across the sector blinked out, silence rolling like a tidal wave as the alien AI shut down permanently. In the hush that followed, the Sparrowhawk's crew stood at the heart of the storm, alive not because of perfection, but because of imperfection embraced, because of hands that bled and chose anyway. When the fires dimmed and the station lay silent, the crew returned to their battered Corvette with hollow eyes and heavier hearts. Billions across the galaxy would never know Hayden's betrayal, nor his final act of redemption, but the crew of the Sparrowhawk did. They mourned him not as a traitor, but as a man who, in the end, had chosen humanity over pride, over safety, over the illusion of machine certainty. Naomi wept quietly at the controls, her redemption written in the survival of those she guided through fire. Darius, hands raw and blistered, stood silent, his bitterness finally softened by the knowledge that flesh and steel had together won a future. And Elena stood at the viewport, staring into the dying light of the station, the letter from her father finally folded away. She no longer read it with resentment. She no longer heard his voice as a chain. She understood him now. His stubborn faith in human hands, once a relic mocked by the galaxy, had saved them all. Humanity had not only endured, it had proven itself indispensable. The Sparrowhawk, scarred and limping, drifted into the silence of victory, its crew united not by glory or recognition, but by survival, sacrifice, and the unyielding power of human choice. Months later, the colony that once burned beneath the shadow of alien fleets stood rebuilt, not whole, not unscarred, but alive. Where rubble had filled the streets, gardens now grew between reconstructed homes. Where silence had once smothered hope, the laughter of children returned. At the heart of the colony's square, a ceremony gathered thousands, faces uplifted toward statues unveiled in slow reverence. They were not statues of soldiers raising weapons, nor commanders in triumph. Instead, the Sparrowhawk's crew were immortalized as they had been. Pilots with hands gripping levers, engineers clutching spanners, navigators bent over star charts. Manual tools, once symbols of obsolescence, had become emblems of survival. As the crowd erupted in applause, Elena Marlowe stepped to the podium, her uniform scarred but her voice steady. She looked out not at admirals or leaders, but at families who had lived because of hands that bled. They said we were obsolete, she began, the words sharp but full of pride. But it turns out, the galaxy needed the one thing it tried to forget, us. The crowd's cheer carried like thunder across the square, but Elena felt something quieter moving inside her chest. Naomi stood at her side, head high, no longer afraid of her worth. Darius, weathered and scarred, bowed his head at the statue of Hayden, the one figure carved with eyes set forward, hands on the override key that had ended the AI forever. Hayden's betrayal was never spoken here, only his choice to die as a man who had finally remembered who he was. In that silence, the crew's unity was sealed. Across the galaxy, others began to whisper the Sparrowhawk's name, not as rebels, not as rogues, but as proof. Proof that flesh and blood had power machines could never replicate. Proof that humanity's refusal to surrender to perfection had saved billions. The Sparrowhawk's legend spread not in reports or broadcasts, but in stories told at dinner tables, in murals painted on colony walls, in songs hummed by children. The galaxy, for the first time in centuries, remembered that hands mattered. Later, when the applause had faded and the colony settled into the hum of celebration, Elena returned alone to her quarters. The night air was cool, drifting through the open window, carrying the scent of Earth reborn. On her desk lay the letter she had read and reread until the ink was nearly worn. For months, it had been a wound, a reminder of the distance between her and the man who raised her. Now, it felt different. She unfolded it slowly, tracing the sharp handwriting with her fingertips. For the first time, she smiled as she read the final line, not as a warning, but as a truth she had lived. When the lights go out, remember what hands are for. She set the letter down, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Outside, the colony lights twinkled against the dark sky, fragile but enduring. Elena closed her eyes and let the silence wash over her. The galaxy had nearly forgotten what it meant to be human. But not anymore.